So I'm traveling to the beach for spring break and I get rear-ended by another car. Do I have a case?
Welcome back to the Williams, Elleby, Howard, and Easter YouTube channel. I'm Joel. This is Jared. We're going to answer that question for you today. The short answer to this question is yes. No matter where you are in the wreck, you most likely have a case if you've been injured after you've been rear-ended. But one important thing that you want to look at is where is the at-fault driver from? Because in most situations, you're probably going to have to make a claim against that driver in the state where they're from or where they reside. But that's not the only thing that matters. There are tons of different things that come into play, like what state laws control, what type of insurance laws are you going to be dealing with when it comes to this particular claim. So step number one is figure out the person that hit me, are they from the state where the wreck occurred? Are they from a different state and we both just happen to be traveling through there, but where are they from?
And this matters because in certain states, like in Georgia, we have the Non-Resident Motorist Act, which basically states that if you get in a wreck in Georgia and there's an out-of-state defendant that caused the wreck, the traditional rule is you would have to sue them in the county where they reside. But in Georgia, due to this statute, it allows you to bring the claim against that defendant in the county where the crash occurred. So it's important to look for those statutes, in the state that you're in and see if other states, if you're not in Georgia, have something like that that could bring the case in the state where the wreck occurred.
Yep, which brings us to point number 3, and that is the second step that you want to go for is finding a personal injury lawyer that handles car accidents in the state where the wreck occurred. Preferably that's where you want to start, especially if they have the Non-Resident Motorist Act. So for example, if you live in Ohio and you're driving through Georgia and you're in Atlanta, and then someone from, I don't know, Kansas is coming in the other direction and hits you in the middle of Atlanta, then preferably you want to look for a lawyer probably in Atlanta or in the Fulton County, Cobb County, Gwinnett County area, somewhere in that metro region where they're familiar with the courts in the state of Georgia and in that specific region. This is probably even more important if you happen to be in a wreck in a rural venue. Like you may want to find somebody who's from Rabun County, a lawyer that's from Rabun County, or a lawyer that's from whatever small county you happen to be in, because then familiarity with the local court personnel and the processes and procedures that go on at that particular courthouse can be even more important. But the next step is to try to find legal representation in the area where you would need to bring the claim.
And this can be important because every state has differing insurance laws. Believe it or not, there are some states that have a completely different system of fault code called a no-fault system. Florida is a state that has a no-fault system where you actually don't bring a claim for your medical bills against the party that hit you. Instead, the residents who live there have their own coverage that would pay for their medical bills, and then you may or may not have a claim for pain and suffering based on a whole lot of different rules that are very state specific. So I think the last time I checked, there might be 14 states still that have a no-fault system. So it's important to have an attorney that's in the area that's familiar with the state laws and whether it could be no fault or a regular, normal, traditional fault system. Also, there's other things to consider, like the amount of insurance limits available. When you get into a wreck, the person who hits you has car insurance that is at a certain level of coverage, meaning, for instance, in Georgia, the minimum amount of coverage you have to have is $25,000. This can be important if you're seriously injured and your bills far and away exceed $25,000. You'll want to know that early on so that your attorney can examine other means of coverage that might help compensate you for the injuries.
Yeah, and that's also important too, because some states the minimum limits is less than $25,000. So if they're driving through the state of Georgia and cause a wreck in the state of Georgia, then they automatically have 25. But you need to know those kinds of things because the insurance company for the at-fault driver may just send you their declarations page and it says, oh, well, Jared's got $10,000 of coverage and you're holding a $20,000 bill wondering what you're going to do with it. But good news is if you're in the state of Georgia and that $10,000 policy applies to a wreck that occurred in Georgia, then it's going to be 25. to meet that state's minimum limit. So little things like that, going back to tip number 3, finding a lawyer in the state where the wreck occurred is going to be beneficial to you because they'll know those ins and outs and those tips that they can give you for things like that. All right, so tip number 5 is when you are in a wreck out of state, it's going to be even more, it's always important to take photos and get the information of witnesses and the responding officer, but it's even more so important when you're out of state because you may never go past that spot again in your entire life. So make sure you take pictures, if you're able, at the scene of the property damage, of roadway markings. Make sure you get the name of the investigating officer and the department that he works for or she works for. So it could be the state patrol of that state. It could be a local city police department. It could be a county sheriff's department, anything like that. Make sure you get all of that information or as much as you can at the scene because you may not have the opportunity to get that later. And then other things like if your vehicle or somebody's vehicle is towed, if you know the towing company that takes it, write that information down so that you can later give it to your attorney and then he or she can go find out where the vehicles are so they can photograph property damage and things of that nature. So there are a few things that are different when you have an out-of-state wreck, but if you're traveling for spring break or any other holiday and you're going through a different state and you get in a wreck there, just know that different laws applies and there's a few different steps that you might need to take to protect your interest once you've been injured in those wrecks. You got anything else, Jared?
No, I think we covered it.
All right. Well, if this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we will see you next week.